They called it absolutely fireproof, a 15-story promise of modern safety rising over downtown Atlanta. On the night of December 7, 1946, guests climbed into clean sheets believing brick and steel could not burn. But just after 3 in the morning, a single cigarette fell into a hallway and found something waiting. Smoke filled stairwells in minutes. Flames climbed unseen walls. By dawn, 119 people were dead, many of them choosing open air over fire as crowds watched from the street below. How did a hotel designed to protect become a machine for killing? Chapter 1. A city that believed in height. In the early 1920s, Atlanta looked upward, convinced that taller meant safer, richer, and immune to old dangers. The war had ended. Boys came home. Cities swelled with ambition and the kind of confidence that forgets caution. Atlanta wanted what New York had, what Chicago promised. It wanted towers that scraped clouds, lobbies filled with leather chairs, elevators that hummed with progress. Height meant permanence. Height meant you had arrived. Downtown Atlanta in 1922 was a patchwork of low brick buildings, wooden storefronts, and the constant sound of construction. Peachtree Street pulsed with streetcars and delivery trucks. The air smelled like coal smoke and ambition. Every week, another foundation was poured. Every month, another ribbon was cut. The city had survived Sherman's fire 60 years earlier, and now it wanted to prove that survival had turned into dominance. William Fleming Winecoff understood this hunger. He was not an architect or a builder. He was a furniture salesman who looked at empty lots and saw profit. He had money, connections, and a belief that Atlanta would reward boldness. When he purchased land on Peachtree Street near Ellis, he commissioned a hotel that would rise 15 stories above the street. 15 stories in a city where most buildings stopped at 5. The plans promised 316 rooms, each with a private bath. The structure would be steel and brick and concrete. No wood frame, no flammable bones. The word fireproof appeared in every brochure, every newspaper advertisement, every conversation with investors. Fireproof meant modern. It meant safe. It meant guests could sleep without fear. But fireproof was a word, not a promise. It described materials, not outcomes. Brick does not burn. Steel does not ignite. Concrete resists flame. But hotels are not made of brick alone. They are filled with mattresses, curtains, carpets, luggage, and people. They are ventilated by shafts that pull air from floor to floor. They are connected by stairwells that funnel heat upward like chimneys. None of this appeared in the marketing. None of this troubled the investors. Atlanta wanted height, and height is what Winecoff would give them. Construction began in 1923. The building rose faster than safety codes could catch up. Georgia had no laws requiring fire escapes on hotels, no mandates for sprinkler systems, no inspections that asked uncomfortable questions. By the time the Winecoff Hotel prepared to open its doors in 1924, it stood as the tallest hotel in the South. Guests would enter through brass revolving doors into a lobby with marble floors and polished wood counters. They would ride elevators operated by attendants in uniform. They would sleep 15 stories above the street, insulated from noise and danger by steel and concrete and absolute certainty. The building was designed to last forever, and, in a way, it did. Chapter 2. The promise sold in brick. Every brochure promised safety, yet every promise quietly avoided the details that actually mattered. The advertisements appeared in newspapers across Georgia and Tennessee. The Winecoff Hotel, they announced, was absolutely fireproof. The phrase appeared in bold type, repeated like a mantra. Fireproof construction, fireproof materials, fireproof design. The word carried weight in 1924, when memories of urban fires still lived in the bones of older residents. Chicago had burned. San Francisco had burned. Atlanta itself had burned. But this was different. This was modern. The hotel's fireproof claim rested on a simple truth. The structure itself would not burn. The steel frame could withstand high temperatures. The brick walls would contain any blaze. The concrete floors would not collapse. Engineers could prove this with tests and mathematics. Insurance underwriters accepted it. City officials nodded in approval. What the advertisements did not mention was everything else. There were no fire escapes. Building codes in Georgia did not require them for fireproof structures. The logic seemed sound. If the building cannot burn, why provide an exterior escape route? Fire escapes were for wooden tenements, for old construction, for buildings designed before modern engineering solved the problem of flame. There were no sprinkler systems. Sprinklers added cost, required maintenance, and seemed redundant in a building that promised not to burn. Automatic alarms belonged in the same category. The Winecoff had a manual fire alarm system that required someone to physically pull a box and alert the front desk. If a fire started in the middle of the night, in a corridor where no one was awake to smell smoke, the alarm would remain silent. The building had exactly one interior stairwell. It ran from the ground floor to the 15th, enclosed by walls but ventilated by transoms above each floor's access door. Transoms allowed air to circulate, preventing the stairwell from becoming stuffy. They also allowed smoke to travel freely from floor to floor, turning the stairwell into a vertical chimney. Guest room doors were wooden, not fire-rated. They had no automatic closers. If a guest fled in panic and left a door open, flames would follow into the corridor. Transoms above these doors also remained open, designed to improve ventilation in an era before air conditioning. Fresh air flowed through the building naturally, pulled upward by heat, and the stack effect of a tall structure. The Winecoff's single stairwell terminated at each floor in a small landing with doors leading to corridors. Guests escaping from upper floors would have to descend through smoke, heat, and chaos, funneled into a space barely wide enough for two people to pass. There was no second stairwell, no alternate route, no way out except down or through a window. William Winecoff marketed luxury and safety in equal measure. He emphasized the private baths, the central location, the proximity to Atlanta's business district and theaters. Traveling salesmen could walk to client meetings. Families visiting the city could shop on Peachtree Street. Honeymooners could afford elegance without extravagance. Rates started at $2 per night. The hotel succeeded immediately. Occupancy remained high through the 1920s and survived the Depression. Guests trusted the building because they had been told to trust it. The word fireproof appeared on stationery, in guidebooks, in conversations at the front desk. It became part of the hotel's identity, woven into its reputation as thoroughly as the bricks in its walls. Nobody questioned what fireproof actually meant. Nobody asked whether safety required more than materials. The building stood tall and confident, a monument to progress, and progress did not need fire escapes. Chapter 3. When luxury finally opened its doors. Opening night felt like a victory not just for investors, but for a city eager to congratulate itself. The Winecoff Hotel opened in 1924 as Atlanta's crown jewel. William Winecoff stood in the lobby on opening day, shaking hands with city officials, bankers, and business owners who would watch the tower rise floor by floor. The marble gleamed, the elevators hummed, the brass fixtures reflected electric light that never flickered. This was permanence made visible. Guests arrived with steamer trunks and leather suitcases. Bellhops carried luggage to rooms that smelled like fresh paint and new carpet. Each room had a window overlooking Peachtree Street or Ellis Street, and every window opened to let in air during Atlanta's humid summers. The beds were firm, the linens were white. The bathrooms had porcelain fixtures and hot water that arrived within seconds. For 2 decades, the Winecoff operated as one of downtown Atlanta's most reliable addresses. It was not the grandest hotel in the city. The Georgian Terrace and the Biltmore offered more opulence, higher rates, and ballrooms for society events. But the Winecoff offered something equally valuable. It offered dependability. It was always open, always clean, always full. Traveling salesmen returned month after month, requesting the same rooms on the same floors. Families visiting from rural Georgia saved money for a night in the city and chose the Winecoff because it felt safe. The building became part of Atlanta's infrastructure, as expected and unremarkable as the streetcars that ran outside its doors. By 1946, the Winecoff had survived the Depression, adapted to wartime restrictions, and entered the post-war boom with steady occupancy. The lobby still gleamed, the elevators still worked, the rooms still filled with guests who climbed into bed, believing the walls around them would protect against anything. On December 6, 1946, the hotel was nearly full. 280 guests checked in or remained from previous nights. Some were in Atlanta for business meetings scheduled for Monday morning. Others were Christmas shopping, drawn to the city's department stores and holiday displays. A group of high school students from McDonough, Georgia, had traveled to Atlanta for a youth assembly at the state capitol. They checked into rooms on the upper floors, excited to be in the city, thrilled to stay in a tall building with elevators and private baths. The evening proceeded normally. Guests ate dinner in nearby restaurants, returned to their rooms, read newspapers, listened to radios. The lobby emptied as night clerks replaced day staff. The elevators stopped running at midnight, their operators going home. Guests who wanted to move between floors after midnight would use the stairs. By 3 in the morning, the building was silent except for the sounds of sleep. Heating radiators ticked, pipes creaked. Somewhere on the 3rd floor, a cigarette that had not been fully extinguished smoldered in a mattress or a sofa or a hallway settee. Nobody knows exactly where it started. Nobody saw the first flame, but smoke began to rise, pulled upward by the building's natural ventilation, moving through transoms and cracks and the open throat of the stairwell. The Winecoff had operated for 22 years without incident. It had earned its reputation. It had proven itself reliable. And on this particular night, it stood ready to demonstrate exactly what fireproof meant when the materials did not burn, but everything inside them did. The building waited, the smoke climbed, and 300 guests slept, trusting the promise that had been sold to them in brick. Chapter 4. The Laws That Looked Away. Georgia law did not demand alarms, sprinklers, or escapes, and nobody with power asked why. In 1946, the state of Georgia had no building code requiring fire escapes on hotels, no mandate for automatic sprinkler systems, no regulation demanding fire alarms beyond a manual pullbox system. The absence of these requirements was not an oversight. It was a choice. Fire safety in the American South operated on a principle of personal responsibility rather than collective regulation. Property owners decided how much safety to install. Guests decided whether to trust those choices. Government stayed out of the transaction. This approach appealed to a culture that valued minimal interference and maximum profit. Safety equipment cost money. Regulations created complications. The market, proponents argued, would solve the problem naturally. Hotels that burned would lose business. Hotels that protected guests would thrive. This logic ignored a simple truth. Guests could not evaluate fire safety. They could not inspect stairwells, count sprinkler heads, or measure the response time of local fire departments. They relied on advertising, reputation, and the assumption that someone with authority had verified the claims. When a hotel called itself fireproof, guests believed it because they had no reason not to. The absence of regulation created a landscape of uneven protection. In 1946, Atlanta had multiple hotels operating without sprinklers, without fire escapes, without adequate alarm systems. The Winecoff was not unique. It was typical. Across Georgia, across the South, hundreds of buildings housed thousands of people in structures that met every legal requirement while providing almost no protection against fire. Insurance companies understood the risk better than lawmakers. They classified buildings by construction type and adjusted premiums accordingly. Fireproof structures paid lower rates than wooden buildings. But insurance calculated financial loss, not human life. A building could burn, kill everyone inside, and still be replaced at a profit if the coverage was sufficient. Lobbying played its role. Hotel owners and developers argued against regulations that would increase construction costs. They pointed to fireproof materials as sufficient protection. They claimed that additional requirements would stifle growth, drive up prices, and harm Atlanta's competitive position against cities like Birmingham or Charlotte. Politicians listened because developers funded campaigns and created jobs. Atlanta's fire department in 1946 operated with equipment designed for lower buildings. The tallest ladder truck could reach approximately 8 stories under ideal conditions. The Winecoff rose 15 floors above street level. Any fire above the 8th floor existed beyond the reach of rescue equipment. Firefighters knew this. City officials knew this. But the knowledge changed nothing because no law required buildings to accommodate the limitations of emergency response. Fire marshal rules at the time focused on prevention rather than rescue. Inspectors checked for blocked exits, flammable storage, and overcrowding. They did not evaluate whether a building's design would trap occupants in a fire. They did not test whether smoke would spread faster than people could evacuate. The assumption held that fireproof construction eliminated the need for these questions. Numbers tell the story. In 1946, fewer than 5% of American hotels had automatic sprinkler systems. Fewer than 10% had more than one interior stairwell. The majority operated under the same model as the Winecoff, relying on materials rather than systems, on promises rather than protections. Georgia's building codes in 1946 filled fewer than 20 pages. They addressed foundation depth, wall thickness, and structural load, but said almost nothing about fire safety beyond basic exit widths. The state had no review process for hotel construction, no certification required before opening, no annual inspection that evaluated emergency preparedness. The Winecoff Hotel met every legal standard. It violated no ordinance. It broke no rule. William Winecoff had built exactly what the law allowed and exactly what the market rewarded. He called it fireproof because the term had no legal definition requiring proof. He omitted safety features because no regulation demanded them. He operated profitably for 2 decades because guests could not see the difference between protection and advertising. This was not negligence, it was the system working as designed. Laws protected property owners from liability by keeping requirements minimal. The market protected profit margins by avoiding expensive safety equipment. And guests paid the price of living in a world where legality replaced responsibility. The law looked away because looking closely would reveal how many buildings stood on the same foundation of calculated risk. To question the Winecoff would be to question hundreds of structures across the South. To demand sprinklers and alarms and fire escapes would be to admit that fireproof had always been a marketing term, not a promise. So, the law remained silent. The buildings remained full, and the gap between safety and legality widened until something burned hot enough to close it. Chapter 5. The building learns to burn. Fireproof materials do not burn, but everything inside them still does. The Winecoff Hotel was a vertical structure designed to channel air and heat with ruthless efficiency. Understanding how it killed requires understanding how it was built. The building measured 120 feet tall from street to roof. Each floor stood approximately 8 feet in height, with ceilings that allowed heat to accumulate before spreading horizontally. The single interior stairwell rose through the center of the structure, enclosed by masonry walls but ventilated by transoms above each landing door. These transoms were 18 inches tall and 30 inches wide, designed to prevent the stairwell from becoming stagnant. They also ensured that smoke from any floor would travel directly upward, filling the stairwell from bottom to top within minutes of a fire starting. Guest rooms lined corridors that stretched the length of each floor. Doors were solid wood, 1 3/4 inches thick, mounted on brass hinges. They had no automatic closers. When opened, they stayed open until someone manually shut them. Above each door, another transom allowed air circulation between the corridor and the guest room. In summer, this created cross-ventilation. In a fire, it created highways for smoke. Walls were plaster over wire lath attached to wooden studs. The plaster would not burn, but the wooden framework would char and eventually fail under sustained heat. Wallpaper covered the plaster in corridors and many guest rooms. The adhesive used to hang wallpaper in the 1920s was often flammable. The paper itself burned readily. Furnishings throughout the hotel were standard for the era. Mattresses filled with cotton batting, curtains made from cotton or rayon, carpets with jute backing, upholstered chairs stuffed with horsehair or cotton. Each room contained a wooden dresser, a wooden desk, a wooden chair. Closets held wooden hangers. Every surface held potential fuel. The hotel's heating system relied on steam radiators connected to a basement boiler. The radiators themselves would not contribute to fire, but the system required vertical shafts running from floor to floor to carry steam pipes. These shafts, like the stairwell, created channels for smoke and heat to rise. Ventilation was passive, depending on open windows and transoms to move air through the building. In December, windows on upper floors would likely be closed against cold night air. Lower floors might have windows cracked open. This created pressure differentials that would pull smoke upward toward closed windows, concentrating it on higher floors where escape was already most difficult. The building had no fire doors, no automatic barriers to compartmentalize a blaze. Once fire entered the corridor system, it could spread horizontally across an entire floor, limited only by how quickly it consumed available fuel. Once it entered the stairwell, it could spread vertically to every floor above the ignition's point within 3 to 5 minutes. Fire moves through buildings in predictable patterns. It follows air, fuel, and paths of least resistance. In the Winecoff, every design choice optimized these patterns. The open transoms acted as chimneys within chimneys. The single stairwell concentrated smoke into a space that became impassable almost immediately. The wooden doors and furnishings provided continuous fuel. The vertical shafts turned the entire structure into a convection engine, pulling heat upward and multiplying intensity as it climbed. Response time mattered. Atlanta's fire department in 1946 could arrive at a downtown location within 5 minutes of an alarm. But the Winecoff had no automatic alarm. Someone would need to discover the fire, reach a manual pull box, alert the front desk, and have the desk clerk call the fire department. If the fire started at 3:15 in the morning in a third-floor corridor where everyone was asleep, discovery might not happen until smoke reached occupied rooms. By then, the stairwell could already be compromised. Ladder trucks in 1946 extended to approximately 85 feet under. Optimal conditions. The 8th floor of the Winecoff stood at roughly 64 feet above street level. The 15th floor stood at 120 feet. Anyone trapped above the 8th floor existed beyond the physical reach of rescue equipment. They could be seen. They could be heard. They could not be saved by any ladder in the city's inventory. Smoke kills faster than fire. Inhalation of superheated gases causes respiratory failure within seconds. Carbon monoxide poisoning induces unconsciousness within minutes. Visibility drops to 0 in thick smoke, making navigation impossible even in familiar spaces. The Winecoff's long corridors and single stairwell meant that guests attempting escape would be moving through smoke before they encountered flame. Many would collapse before reaching an exit. The building's fireproof construction created an additional problem. Because the structure itself would not burn, fire remained contained within the building rather than venting, through a collapsed roof or breached walls. Heat accumulated, temperatures rose. The Winecoff became an oven with people trapped inside. This was not a flaw in design. It was design working exactly as intended. Fireproof meant the building survived. It said nothing about the people within it. The bricks would stand, the steel would hold, the concrete would endure, and everything combustible would burn until nothing remained but ash and silence. The building had learned its purpose through 22 years of operation. It had learned to trust its materials, to ignore its vulnerabilities, to believe its own advertising. On the night of December 7th, it would teach one final lesson. That safety is not a material, it is a system. And systems require more than brick. Chapter 6. 3 minutes past 3. At approximately 3:15 in the morning, a guest smelled smoke and opened the wrong door. The fire began somewhere on the 3rd floor. The exact location remains disputed. Some investigators believed it started in a mattress where a cigarette had been carelessly discarded. Others pointed to a corridor settee. A few suggested wiring or spontaneous combustion in stored linens. What matters is not the spark, but what happened next. Smoke rose. It moved through the open transom into the corridor. It traveled along the ceiling, accumulating in a layer that thickened and descended. Within minutes, the smoke reached a guest room where someone woke to the smell. They opened their door to investigate. That open door was the first critical failure. It allowed smoke to pour into the room. It allowed the guest to see flames in the corridor. It triggered panic. The guest likely screamed, waking others. Doors opened along the hallway. More smoke entered more rooms. The fire, previously contained, now had fresh oxygen and multiple paths to spread. Someone pulled the manual fire alarm in the 3rd floor corridor. The bell rang at the front desk. The night clerk, initially uncertain, called the fire department at 3:42 in the morning. By that time, the fire had been burning for at least 15 minutes, possibly longer. Smoke had filled the 3rd floor corridor completely. It had entered the stairwell through the open transom above the landing door. It had begun rising toward upper floors, Guests on the fourth and fifth floors woke to smoke seeping under their doors and through transoms. Some attempted to use the stairs. They opened corridor doors and found the stairwell black with smoke, heat radiating upward. Those who entered collapsed within seconds. Those who retreated to their rooms faced a different calculation. The fire spread floor by floor, not in a steady climb, but in surges driven by ventilation and fuel. When a door opened, flames followed oxygen. When a window broke, air rushed in and intensified combustion. The building's design turned every attempt at escape into an accelerant. By 3:45, the fire department arrived. At Peachtree and Ellis, they saw smoke pouring from upper floor windows. They saw faces in those windows. They extended ladders and realized immediately that their equipment could not reach beyond the 8th floor. Firefighters climbed what ladders they had, rescuing guests who could reach windows on lower floors. Above them, the unreachable watched and made their own decisions. Guests on floors 9 through 15 faced an impossible choice. The stairwell was impassable. The corridors filled with smoke faster than anyone could navigate to an exit. Windows opened to a drop that varied from 70 to 120 feet depending on the floor. There was no correct answer. Some tried wet towels under doors and waited for rescue that could not come. Smoke entered through transoms, through cracks, through ventilation. Carbon monoxide accumulated. People lost consciousness before they could reconsider. Others tied sheets together, attempting to climb down exterior walls. The sheets could not support weight. They tore or slipped from makeshift anchors. Bodies fell. A few attempted the stairwell despite the smoke. They crawled low, holding breath, trying to descend by memory and touch. Most collapsed within 2 floors. A handful reached the lobby or lower corridors, where firefighters found them unconscious but alive. The hotel had no intercom system, no way to communicate instructions, no central authority directing evacuation. Each guest made individual choices based on incomplete information and rising terror. Some choices led to survival, most did not. Firefighters inside the building fought not just fire, but architecture. The single stairwell funneled smoke directly toward them as they climbed. They had to advance, retreat, advance again, gaining floors slowly while people died above them. Water pressure from hoses barely reached upper floors. The building was too tall, the equipment was too old. The design had never considered this scenario. By 4 in the morning, flames were visible from the street, windows shattered from heat. Smoke poured into the December sky, visible for miles. Downtown Atlanta woke to sirens and the sight of a building burning from the inside while its exterior remained intact. The fireproof construction was doing exactly what it promised. The walls stood. The floors held. The structure refused to collapse. But inside, temperatures exceeded 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Wood furnishings became fuel, plaster cracked, glass melted, and people who had believed in brick made desperate choices in rooms with no exit. The fire burned for over 3 hours before firefighters controlled it enough to begin searching floor by floor. What they found would take days to fully catalog. But even in those first moments, as dawn approached and smoke thinned, the scale of loss was undeniable. The Winecoff had promised safety. It had delivered precision. Every flaw had multiplied. Every shortcut had compounded. Every choice made, in the name of cost and convenience, had led to this. The building had trapped heat, smoke, and people, and it had forced the nation to finally look upward at the cost of believing its own advertising. Chapter 7. The Choice. No one survives. Guests above the 8th floor faced a decision with no correct answer. The mathematics of falling are unforgiving. From the 9th floor, approximately 72 feet above street level, a body reaches terminal velocity of roughly 53 miles per hour within 2 seconds. Impact with pavement generates force exceeding 6,000 pounds per square inch. Survival at this height is statistically improbable. From the 15th floor, 120 feet up, the fall lasts just over 2.5 seconds. Terminal velocity approaches 68 miles per hour. Survival becomes impossible. Guests knew this, not in numbers, but in instinct. Height translates to danger in ways the body understands without calculation. Yet when smoke filled, rooms and heat-seared lungs, the window became the only alternative to certain death by fire. The choice was not between safety and risk. It was between dying now or dying slightly later, between burning or falling, between agony prolonged or agony instant. William Fleming Winecoff, the hotel's namesake and original owner, died in his fifth-floor apartment within the building that night. He was 63 years old. He attempted the stairwell and collapsed from smoke inhalation before reaching the lobby. His body was found hours later. The man who built the fireproof hotel died inside it, undone by the same design choices that killed 118 others. On the upper floors, families made decisions together. Parents held children, spouses gripped hands. In room 1021, a couple from North Carolina stood at the window and looked down at the crowd gathering below. Firefighters shouted instructions that could not be heard over the chaos. The couple held each other and stepped into open air. They landed together. Neither survived. The high school students from McDonough, Georgia, occupied rooms on the 11th and 12th floors. They were 15 and 16 years old, in the city for a youth assembly at the Capitol. When smoke entered their rooms, they ran to windows and screamed for help. Firefighters on the street could see them clearly. Faces pressed against glass, hands waving, voices calling names of friends in nearby rooms. The ladders would not reach. There was nothing to do but watch. Some students attempted to climb down using knotted sheets. The improvised ropes held for a few feet, then tore. Bodies fell. Other students, seeing this, retreated into smoke-filled rooms and were found later, collapsed near their beds. Of the 15 students in the hotel that night, 14 died. The sole survivor had been placed in a lower floor room. A woman on the 13th floor appeared at her window, holding her infant child. The crowd below could see her clearly in the glow of flames and streetlights. She held the baby out the window and dropped it, hoping someone below might catch it. The baby fell 13 stories. A man on the street tried. He broke the child's fall, but could not prevent the impact. The baby died. The mother jumped moments later and died instantly. Not everyone at the windows jumped by choice. Some leaned out seeking air and lost balance. Others were pushed by people behind them, trying to escape smoke. A few fainted from carbon monoxide poisoning while standing at open windows and simply fell. The result was the same, regardless of intent. Firefighters on ladders that reached the 7th and 8th floors worked frantically to pull guests through windows onto rungs. They saved dozens this way, climbing up and down repeatedly, their arms aching, their faces blackened by smoke. But for every person saved at ladder height, 3 more died above the reach of rescue. The crowd on Peachtree Street grew to over 1,000 people. They stood in their nightclothes and winter coats, watching faces in windows high above. They heard screams, they heard impacts, they heard the sound of glass breaking and wood collapsing. Some tried to help by holding blankets taut, hoping to catch jumpers. The physics made this futile. A body falling from 10 stories generates more force than any fabric or human chain can absorb. The blankets tore. The catchers were injured. The jumpers died anyway. Photographers arrived from the Atlanta Constitution and the Atlanta Journal. They documented everything: faces in windows, bodies falling, the crowd reacting. By morning, images would appear on front pages across the nation. One photograph showed a man in midair between the 11th floor and the pavement. Another captured a woman hanging from a windowsill by her fingertips before her grip failed. The images were graphic, immediate, and undeniable. They showed exactly what fireproof meant when materials survived, and people did not. Inside the building, guests who chose to wait rather than jump faced different horror. Smoke inhalation causes confusion before unconsciousness. People lose spatial awareness. They crawl in wrong directions. They collapse in bathrooms, in closets, in corners far from doors. Carbon monoxide bonds to hemoglobin 240 times more effectively than oxygen. Once absorbed, it prevents oxygenation even if the victim reaches fresh air. Many died not from burns, but from breathing toxic gases while trying to decide whether to jump. Some survived by decisions made in seconds. A man on the 10th floor soaked towels in his bathroom sink, stuffed them under the door, and lay on the floor near the window, breathing outside air until firefighters reached his floor hours later. A woman on the 9th floor broke her window with a chair leg, leaned out into freezing December air, and stayed there for over an hour until a ladder reached her. Both made choices that required clarity. in chaos, calm, and panic, and conditions that allowed those choices to work. 70 guests died from falls or jumps. 49 died from smoke inhalation or burns inside the building. The distribution tells a story. Lower floors burned hotter, but allowed some escape through ladders and stairs. Upper floors offered cleaner air initially, but no path out. The middle floors, 9 through 11, saw the highest death toll because they combined lethal smoke with unreachable height. By the time firefighters controlled the blaze enough to enter upper floors, they found bodies in every configuration of failed escape. People piled near stairwell doors they could not open. People collapsed in hallways feet from their rooms. People dead in beds where they had retreated to wait. The positions told stories of decisions made in darkness and smoke, of hope that lasted seconds or minutes before physiology or flame ended it. The Winecoff had created a laboratory for impossible choice. It had removed every option except the worst ones and then forced people to select among them: jump or burn, suffocate or fall, wait or run. There were no good answers because the building had been designed without considering the question. What remained, when smoke cleared and bodies were counted, was the clarity of consequence. Safety is not a claim, it is not a material. It is a system that assumes disaster and builds against it. The Winecoff had assumed nothing would burn because it called itself fireproof. And when everything did burn, it offered no path out except windows that opened onto empty air. Chapter 8. Watching from the street. Hundreds gathered below, unable to help, forced to witness the consequences of design decisions. The first witnesses were people who could not sleep through sirens. They came to windows in nearby buildings, in apartments and hotels along Peachtree Street, and saw smoke rising from the Winecoff. They dressed quickly and went outside, joining a crowd that grew every minute as fire trucks arrived and lights illuminated upper floors. By 4 a.m, Peachtree Street between Ellis and Kane was packed with spectators, firefighters, police officers, and medical personnel. The temperature hovered near freezing. People stood in coats and blankets, looking up at a building where other people were dying. The crowd could see everything. Faces appeared in windows, mouths open in screams that could barely be heard over sirens and shouting. Hands waved makeshift signals. Some windows showed flames behind the figures. Others showed only smoke. The crowd watched a woman trying to tie sheets together. They watched her lose her grip. They watched her fall. They watched and could do nothing. Firefighters worked with fury and helplessness in equal measure. Chief C.C. Styron directed operations from the street, coordinating ladder placements and hose crews. Every decision was a triage calculation. Which windows to prioritize, which floors to reach first, how to allocate limited equipment against unlimited need. The tallest ladder truck could extend 85 feet under perfect conditions. That morning, conditions were not perfect. The street was crowded. Hose lines crossed pavement. Firefighters had to position trucks at angles that reduced effective ladder height. Even at full extension, they could not reach above the 8th floor. This meant approximately 150 guests were beyond rescue by ladder. Firefighters climbed what ladders they had repeatedly. Up to the 7th floor, pull someone through a window, climb down, go back up. They saved 37 people this way. Each rescue took minutes. Each minute, more people died above. The mathematics of response could not match the scale of emergency. Inside the building, firefighters forced their way up the stairwell floor by floor. They wore no breathing apparatus. Self-contained breathing equipment existed in 1946, but was rare and expensive. Atlanta's fire department relied on wet cloths held over faces, on breath holding, on advance and retreat as smoke allowed. Progress was measured in single floors gained per hour. The stairwell resisted them like an enemy. Smoke descended in waves. Heat radiated from walls. Wooden debris from collapsed doors and furnishings blocked landings. Firefighters had to clear obstacles blind, in smoke too thick to see through, while people died in rooms 10 feet away. Hosey crews on the street aimed water at upper floor windows, trying to cool rooms and give occupants more time. Water pressure barely reached the 12th floor. Above that, streams fell short or dispersed into mist. Guests in those rooms saw water arcing upward from below, saw it fall away before reaching them, and understood they were beyond help. Ambulances lined Ellis Street. Medical personnel set up triage stations on the sidewalk. They treated burns, smoke inhalation, broken bones from falls onto awnings or ledges. They covered bodies with sheets as they were brought down from ladders or recovered from the pavement. The number of covered forms grew faster than the number of survivors being treated. Police cordoned off the immediate area, pushing the crowd back from the fall zone. People had been standing directly below windows when bodies fell. One man was struck and injured. Others saw impacts from feet away and would carry those images forever. Officers tried to create space between spectators and tragedy, but the crowd resisted. People wanted to help. They wanted to witness. They wanted to believe their presence mattered even when it did not. Reporters took notes and photographs. Radio stations broadcast live updates. By dawn, the story had spread across the southeast. By afternoon, it would be national news. The Winecoff hotel fire would become the deadliest hotel fire in American history, a record it still holds. But that morning, on Peachtree Street, it was not yet history. It was bodies, falling, and people screaming, and firefighters cursing equipment that could not reach high enough. The crowd heard sounds that would haunt them. The specific pitch of a scream from 13 stories up. The silence between a body leaving a window and striking pavement. The collective gasp when another figure appeared at another window. The crying of survivors pulled from lower floors, calling names of family members still inside. A minister from a nearby church arrived and began praying aloud. Others joined him, the prayer mixed with sirens and commands shouted by firefighters and the crackling of flames consuming wood and fabric and human lives. There was no comfort in it, only the human need to speak in the presence of death. Sunrise came slowly. The December sky lightened from black to gray to pale blue. Smoke continued to pour from the upper floors, but flames were no longer visible from the street. The fire had consumed available fuel and was burning itself out, starved of oxygen and material. Firefighters entered upper floors cautiously, finding room after room of destruction and bodies. The crowd thinned as people went to work or returned home, exhausted and shaken. Those who remained watched firefighters carry bodies down ladders wrapped in blankets, watch medical examiners arrive with clipboards and cameras, watch the Winecoff Hotel stand intact, its brick walls unmarked, its steel frame undeformed, its fireproof construction proven absolutely effective at preserving the building while killing everyone inside. By noon, the street had been cleaned of debris. Blood and broken glass had been hosed into gutters. The bodies had been transported to the morgue. The survivors had been taken to hospitals or hotels. Peachtree Street returned to normal traffic patterns. The crowd dispersed. But what they had seen could not be unseen. What they had heard could not be unheard. The witnesses would tell these stories for the rest of their lives. They would describe the woman who dropped her baby, the students waving from 11th floor windows, the man who hung from a ledge by his fingertips for 2 minutes before falling, the faces they could see so clearly, pressed against glass, backlit by flames, making eye contact across a distance of 100 feet and a gap of total helplessness. Watching from the street was its own kind of trauma, not the trauma of burning or falling, but the trauma of seeing both and being able to prevent neither. The crowd had been forced to witness the consequences of design decisions made 22 years earlier. Decisions about stairwells and fire escapes and sprinkler systems. Decisions that saved money and cost lives. Decisions that turned a winter night in Atlanta into a public execution witnessed by hundreds who could only watch and remember. Chapter 9. When the sun revealed everything. Daylight exposed, bodies, blackened walls, and the silence that follows collective shock. Morning came without relief. Sunrise illuminated the Winecoff's exterior walls, still standing, still intact, still absolutely fireproof. The brick showed no damage. The steel frame had not buckled. The structure had survived exactly as promised. But inside, the building had become a tomb. Firefighters continued searching floor by floor through the morning. They moved through corridors choked with debris, opening doors to rooms where smoke had killed before fire arrived. Bodies lay in bathrooms where victims had tried to breathe through wet towels. Bodies lay in closets where people had sought shelter. Bodies lay in beds where guests had succumbed to carbon monoxide while deciding whether to run. The identification process began immediately. Personal effects were cataloged: wallets, jewelry, monogrammed clothing. Some bodies were too badly burned for visual identification. Others showed no burns at all, killed by smoke inhalation that left skin intact but lungs destroyed. Medical examiners worked through the day, photographing, documenting, attempting to restore names to remains. Family members arrived at downtown morgues and hospitals, searching for missing relatives. The high school students from McDonough were identified first because school officials had records of room assignments. Parents drove to Atlanta and were directed to the Fulton County morgue. They identified children by clothing, by jewelry, by scars, or birthmarks. 14 families received bodies to take home. One family received their child alive from a hospital, the only student survivor. Business travelers were harder to identify. Many had checked in alone, carried minimal identification, and had no one in Atlanta to report them missing. Their bodies were held, while authorities contacted addresses listed in hotel registers, sent telegrams to next of kin, waited for responses that sometimes took days. By afternoon, the death toll stood at 119, 70 adults and 49 adolescents and children. A number would be verified and re-verified, but it would not change. 119 people had entered the Winecoff Hotel expecting safety and had died because safety had been defined as materials rather than systems. The building's interior told the story in physical detail. On the third floor where fire started, walls were blackened and peeling. Wooden door frames had charred. Carpets had burned completely, leaving concrete floors exposed. But the floor itself had not collapsed. The ceiling had not caved. The structure had contained the fire exactly as engineered. Upper floors showed less fire damage, but more evidence of smoke. Soot coated every surface. Walls were streaked black. Furniture remained mostly intact, but discolored. The deadliest rooms showed almost no flame damage at all. People had died from breathing poison, not from burning. The stairwell was the clearest evidence of failed design. From bottom to top, walls were black with soot. The enclosed space had funneled, smoke upward with perfect efficiency. Every transom had allowed passage. Every floor had contributed additional smoke until the entire vertical shaft became a chimney of toxic gas. No one who entered the stairwell above the fourth floor had survived. Windows on upper floors had been opened or broken from inside. Glass littered the pavement below, mixed with debris thrown from rooms in desperate attempts to signal for help. Firefighters found chairs on windowsills, mattresses pushed against glass, luggage stacked as makeshift barriers against smoke. The rooms showed the archaeology of panic, every object repositioned by people trying to survive. The hotel's lobby remained largely untouched. Marble floors were wet from hose water, but unburned. The front desk stood intact, registration books open to December 6th. Mail slots still held keys and messages. The lobby could have reopened for business immediately. It was only when you looked upward, toward the stairwell opening, that destruction became visible. Downtown Atlanta moved carefully that day. People walked past the Winecoff and stared upward. They saw broken windows, smoke stains, and nothing else that revealed the scale of death. The building looked wounded but standing, survivors and intact in the way fireproof construction promises. The horror was invisible from the street. Newspapers published extra editions. The Atlanta Constitution ran photographs across the entire front page. Bodies falling, faces at windows, firefighters on ladders. The images were graphic enough that some editors debated whether to print them. They printed them anyway because the story demanded to be seen. Radio stations broadcast interviews with survivors, with firefighters, with witnesses who had watched from the street. National media arrived by afternoon. Reporters from New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles checked into other Atlanta hotels and filed stories that would run in hundreds of newspapers. The Winecoff became instant. Shorthand for fire safety failure, the word fireproof appeared in every headline, often in quotation marks, dripping with irony. Survivors gave statements from hospital beds. They described smoke-filling rooms in seconds, heat so intense it blistered skin from feet away, the sound of people screaming in adjacent rooms. They described choosing between stairwell and window, and finding both options led to near certain death. They described luck and timing and decisions made in darkness that happened to be correct. One survivor, a woman from the 9th floor, had climbed out her window onto a narrow ledge and moved laterally along the exterior wall until she reached a fire escape on an adjacent building. She had not known the fire escape was there. She had simply moved sideways because down was impossible and staying was death. She inched along brick 12 inches at a time, 90 feet above pavement, and found safety by accident. Her survival was statistical noise. 99% of people in her situation died. Investigators from the National Fire Protection Association arrived and began examining the building. They measured stairwell dimensions, tested ventilation patterns, calculated smoke spread rates. Their report would take months to complete, but the conclusions were already obvious. The Winecoff had been designed without considering fire as a real possibility. It had assumed fireproof materials eliminated fire risk. It had optimized for construction cost and operational efficiency without planning for evacuation. The building's owner, now deceased in the fire he had created, could not answer questions. The architects had followed codes that did not exist. The city had approved plans that met every legal requirement. Nobody was at fault in the sense that courts recognize fault. Everyone was responsible in the sense that choices compound into consequences. By evening, the search was complete. 119 confirmed dead. Firefighters sealed the building and posted guards. The Winecoff would remain closed for months while investigations proceeded and insurance companies calculated liability. But the building itself was sound. The steel was strong. The brick was intact. The fireproof structure had survived perfectly. As darkness fell on December 7th, downtown Atlanta was quieter than usual. People stayed home. Those who walked Peachtree Street crossed to the far side to avoid passing directly in front of the Winecoff. The building loomed above them, 15 stories of shadow and silence, a monument to the gap between what we promise and what we deliver when we call something safe. The dead had been removed, the survivors had been treated, the witnesses had gone home. What remained was a building that had done exactly what it was designed to do: stand firm, resist collapse, endure. And in enduring, preserve a lesson written in 119 lives about the cost of confusing materials with protection. Chapter 10. No. One went to prison investigations named causes, but not villains, and the building remained standing. The inquiries began within hours. Fire marshals, city officials, and insurance investigators walked through the Winecoff taking measurements and photographs. They interviewed survivors. They examined building plans filed with the city in 1923. They compiled reports that ran to hundreds of pages. Every investigation reached the same conclusion. The fire had started from a carelessly discarded cigarette. The building had no sprinklers to suppress the blaze. It had no fire escapes for evacuation. It had inadequate alarms to warn sleeping guests. The single stairwell had acted as a flue, spreading smoke vertically. The open transoms had accelerated distribution. Wooden furnishings had provided fuel. The fireproof structure had trapped heat and people with equal efficiency. No investigation found criminal negligence. William Fleming. Winecoff had died in the fire, removing the primary target for accountability. The hotel's managing company had leased the building and operated it according to all applicable laws. The architects had designed a structure that met Georgia's building codes. The city had approved construction based on those codes. The fire department had responded as quickly as equipment allowed. At every level, the answer was the same. We followed the rules, we met the standards, we did what was legal. The legal system struggled with this. Prosecutors reviewed case files and found no statutes violated. Yes, the building lacked fire escapes, but fire escapes were not required by law. Yes, there were no sprinklers, but sprinklers were not mandated. Yes, the stairwell design was deadly, but no code-specified stairwell ventilation standards. Civil lawsuits were filed by families of the dead. They sought damages from the hotel's ownership company, from the architect's estates, from the city of Atlanta. The suits alleged negligence, wrongful death, and reckless endangerment. They argued that calling a building fireproof while omitting basic safety equipment constituted fraud. The lawsuits settled quietly. Ownership companies paid undisclosed sums to avoid prolonged litigation. Insurance carriers contributed to settlement pools. No case went to trial. No precedent was established. Money changed hands and silence was purchased alongside it. the Atlanta city government faced the harshest scrutiny. How had a 15-story hotel operated for 22 years without fire escapes? How had inspectors approved occupancy? How had the fire department not flagged the building as high risk? City officials pointed to state law. Georgia's building code was minimal. Cities could not impose stricter requirements without state legislative authority. Atlanta had enforced the laws that existed, not the laws that should have existed. The responsibility belonged to lawmakers in the Capitol, not inspectors on Peachtree Street. The Georgia legislature convened in January 1947. Legislators proposed new fire safety requirements, mandatory sprinklers in all hotels over 3 stories, fire escapes on all buildings, where interior stairwells could become compromised, automatic alarm systems, annual inspections, penalties for non-compliance. The bills faced immediate opposition. Hotel owners argued that retrofitting existing buildings would cost millions. Small towns claimed they could not afford to enforce new codes. Insurance companies objected to mandates that would shift liability. Developers warned that stricter regulations would slow construction and harm economic growth. Compromise bills were drafted. Sprinklers would be required in new construction, but existing buildings would be grandfathered. Fire escapes would be recommended but not mandated. Inspections would be encouraged but not funded. The final legislation that passed in 1947 contained more loopholes than requirements. Atlanta moved faster than the state. The city council passed local ordinances requiring fire safety improvements in all downtown hotels. The Winecoff's ownership was ordered to install sprinklers, add a second stairwell, and retrofit fire doors throughout the building. Compliance would cost an estimated $250,000. The owners balked. The building was damaged. Occupancy was impossible. Revenue had stopped. They could not fund renovations without income to support them. The hotel sat empty through 1947 and into 1948, a locked tower in the center of downtown, visible reminder of the night. Atlanta learned that height without safety is just elevation. No architect lost their license. No city official was fired. No legislator faced electoral consequences for years of inadequate regulation. The system had failed spectacularly, publicly, and lethally. The system responded by investigating itself and finding that everyone had followed the rules. The moral question remains separate from the legal one. Should builders have known better? Should owners have prioritized safety over profit? Should lawmakers have anticipated disaster before it occurred? The answer to all 3 was yes, but morality does not appear in criminal statutes or civil codes. The Winecoff fire killed 119 people and produced 0 convictions. It revealed a gap between responsibility and accountability that no investigation could bridge. People had died because of choices made over decades by dozens of individuals acting within legal boundaries. No single person was a murderer. Collectively, they had built a killing machine. This was the lesson that courtrooms could not teach, but the dead made undeniable. Systems protect systems. Laws protect those who write them. And when tragedy occurs within legal boundaries, justice becomes a matter of settlements and silence rather than trials and verdicts. The families of the dead received money. They did not receive answers that satisfied. They did not receive punishment for those responsible. They received the knowledge that their loved ones had died legally in a building that met every requirement, operated by people who followed every rule. The building remained standing because tearing it down would cost more than repairing it. The structure was sound. The materials had proven fireproof. All it needed was the safety equipment it should have had from the beginning. And so, the Winecoff waited, empty and dark, for someone to decide whether its survival was worth the investment. Chapter 11. Codes. Written in ash fire safety laws changed not because of foresight, but because too many people died at once. The Winecoff fire became a case study in engineering schools, fire academies, and legislative chambers across the country. The National Fire Protection Association published a detailed report that analyzed every failure. The document ran to 147 pages. It included floor plans, burn patterns, survivor testimony, and calculations of smoke spread rates. It concluded that the deaths were preventable and the building was typical. That second conclusion mattered most. If the Winecoff was an outlier, an unusually dangerous building operated by uniquely negligent owners, then its lessons were limited. But if it represented standard practice, then hundreds of hotels across America were equally deadly. The report confirmed the latter. In 1947, fewer than 6% of American hotels had automatic sprinkler systems. Most relied on manual alarms that required human action to trigger. Multi-story hotels routinely operated with single stairwells and no fire escapes. The Winecoff was not an exception. It was the norm with worse luck. This realization drove national reform. The National Fire Protection Association, previously an advisory body, began advocating for mandatory standards. They drafted model codes that cities and states could adopt. They provided technical assistance to municipalities trying to upgrade fire safety. They published studies showing cost-benefit analyses of sprinkler installation versus fire damage. Insurance companies joined the push. The Winecoff fire had cost them millions in death benefits and liability settlements. Preventing future disasters was cheaper than paying for them after they occurred. Underwriters began requiring sprinklers and fire escapes as conditions of coverage. Hotels without these features faced dramatically higher premiums or outright denial of insurance. The economics shifted. Previously, fire safety was an expense to avoid. Now, it became a cost of doing business. Hotels installed sprinklers because insurance was unaffordable without them. They added fire escapes because municipalities demanded them as conditions of operating licenses. They upgraded alarm systems because liability exposure made outdated equipment financially reckless. Between 1947 and 1952, over 2,000 American hotels installed automatic sprinkler systems. Cities including New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles passed ordinances requiring fire escapes on all residential buildings over 4 stories. Building codes were rewritten to mandate dual stairwells, fire doors, and emergency lighting. Inspections became annual rather than periodic. The changes saved lives measurably. Hotel fire deaths in the United States dropped from an average of 230 per year in the 1940s to fewer than 90 per year by the mid-1950s. The reduction corresponded directly to sprinkler installation rates and improved building codes, but implementation was uneven. Wealthy cities moved quickly. Poor communities lacked resources for enforcement. Rural areas continued operating hotels built to pre-Winecoff standards well into the 1960s. Economic inequality translated directly into safety inequality. Those who could afford protection received it. Those who could not relied on luck and hope. The federal government eventually intervened. In 1966, Congress passed the National Historic Preservation Act, which included provisions for fire safety in public buildings. The legislation provided funding for municipalities to upgrade older structures and created minimum safety standards for federal buildings and federally funded projects. It was partial, limited, and compromised, but it represented the first national acknowledgement that fire safety was a public responsibility rather than a private choice. The Winecoff itself became a symbol in legislative debates. Lawmakers referenced the fire when arguing for stricter codes. Opponents dismissed it as an isolated tragedy, not representative of normal conditions. Both sides used the same facts to support opposite conclusions. What remained constant was the number, 119, the deadliest hotel fire in American history, a record that still stands because reforms following the disaster made such large-scale death increasingly rare. Engineers studied the Winecoff's design failures and incorporated lessons into professional training. Architecture schools taught the fire as an example of systemic thinking. The building demonstrated that safety requires integration of structure, systems, and human behavior. Fireproof materials alone guarantee nothing. Safety emerges from redundancy, from multiple escape routes, from alarm systems that assume people will be asleep, from sprinklers that activate automatically because manual response is too slow. The hotel industry resisted initially, then adapted. Hotel chains built reputations on safety features. They advertised sprinkler systems and fire escapes as amenities alongside pools and restaurants. What had been an expense became a marketing advantage. Guests chose hotels that prominently displayed fire safety certifications. The market aligned with regulation, and safety became profitable. Numbers quantify the transformation. In 1946, Approximately 1,500 hotels nationwide had automatic sprinklers. By 1970, over 32,000 had them. In 1946, building codes in most states filled fewer than 25 pages. By 1970, codes exceeded 300 pages with entire sections devoted to fire safety, evacuation planning, and alarm systems. The Winecoff fire did not create these changes alone. Other disasters contributed. The Coconut Grove nightclub fire in Boston in 1942 killed 492 people. The Our Lady of Angels school fire in Chicago in 1958 killed 92 children and 3 nuns. Each tragedy added urgency to reform efforts. But the Winecoff held particular power because it undermined the promise of modern construction. It proved that new did not mean safe, that height did not mean progress, that fireproof was a lie without systems to support it. Survivors of the fire became advocates. They testified before legislative committees. They spoke at fire safety conferences. They shared stories of impossible choices and preventable deaths. Their presence made abstract statistics into human testimony. Lawmakers could ignore numbers. They could not ignore a woman describing how she watched her husband burn because the stairwell was impassable and the window was too high. By the end of the 20th century, the reforms initiated after the Winecoff had become standard. Sprinklers, fire escapes, dual stairwells, automatic alarms, emergency lighting, fire doors, compartmentalization, and regular inspections were legal requirements in every state. Hotels could not operate without them. Insurance would not cover them. Guests expected them. The change was incomplete and imperfect. Enforcement varied. Older buildings received exemptions. Budget constraints delayed upgrades, but the direction was clear and irreversible. Fire. Safety had transitioned from optional to mandatory, from private to public, from cost to investment. 119 people died so that millions could sleep in hotels without facing the same choice between burning and falling. The exchange was not fair, it was not just, but it was real. Laws written in ash are the most durable because they are purchased with lives that cannot be refunded. Chapter 12. The building that still stands. Today, the tower survives under a different name, quietly woven back into daily life. The Winecoff Hotel remained closed and empty for 12 years after the fire. The building stood dark on Peachtree Street, windows boarded, doors chained, a 15-story reminder that downtown residents passed without looking up. Ownership changed hands 3 times between 1947 and 1959. Each new owner evaluated renovation costs against potential income and walked away. The structure itself remained sound. Inspectors confirmed the steel. Frame showed no degradation. The brick exterior required minimal repair. The concrete floors were intact. The fireproof construction had survived exactly as promised. What needed replacement was everything inside: wiring, plumbing, walls, doors, flooring. Every surface had been damaged by smoke, water, or demolition during the investigation. Renovation would essentially gut the building and rebuild the interior within a standing shell. In 1959, a hotel investment group purchased the property and committed to full renovation. They hired architects to redesign the interior layout. They installed a complete automatic sprinkler system with heads in every room and corridor. They added a second stairwell, cutting through floors and walls to create an alternate escape route. They replaced all wooden doors with fire-rated steel doors that closed automatically. They eliminated transoms entirely, installing modern HVAC systems for ventilation. They added illuminated exit signs, emergency lighting, and an intercom system connected to every floor. The renovation cost over $1 million, more than 4 times the building's original construction cost in 1923. When the work finished in 1961, the building reopened as the Peachtree on Peachtree Hotel. The new name was deliberate. Winecoff carried associations no marketing team wanted. The rebranding attempted to erase memory through nomenclature. The strategy succeeded partially. The Peachtree on Peachtree operated profitably through the 1960s and 70s. Guests who did not know the building's history saw a renovated hotel with modern amenities in a convenient location. Those who knew often chose other accommodations. Occupancy rates remained lower than comparable downtown hotels, but the building survived economically. In 2007, the hotel underwent another renovation and reopened as the Ellis Hotel. Again, the name change attempted to separate present from past. The Ellis marketed itself as a boutique hotel with a health-conscious theme. They removed smoking from all rooms and common areas. They offered yoga mats and healthy breakfast options. They emphasized wellness and clean air and safety in ways that carefully avoided mentioning why those features might matter. The Ellis operates today. Guests check in, ride elevators to rooms on 15 floors, sleep in beds located where others died 78 years ago. The building has been cleansed of physical evidence. New carpets cover floors. New walls replace those stained by smoke. New windows look out over a city that has grown around and past the memory of December 7, 1946. But memory persists in ways architecture cannot erase. Hotel staff report that certain guests ask about the fire. They want to know which floors burned hottest, which rooms saw deaths, whether the building is haunted. The questions come often enough that the Ellis developed a policy. Staff acknowledge the history briefly and factually. They mention the fire, the death toll, and the renovations. They do not elaborate. They do not speculate. They redirect conversation toward the present. Stories circulate regardless. Guests report strange sounds on upper floors, footsteps in empty corridors, voices calling names, doors closing on their own. The reports follow patterns common to any old building. Pipes knock, HVAC systems hum. Doors respond to air pressure changes. Every unexplained sound can be explained by physics and aging infrastructure. Yet the stories persist because humans attach meaning to space. A room where someone died feels different even when it looks identical to every other room. The feeling is psychological, not supernatural, but psychology is real. People sense weight in certain spaces. They imagine presence. They interpret coincidence as communication. Whether this represents actual haunting or projected trauma is unprovable, and ultimately, irrelevant. The effect is the same. The building carries its past into its present through the stories people tell about what they feel when they stand inside it. Historians and fire safety professionals visit the Ellis occasionally. They take photographs. They request access to original architectural plans. They write case studies and give presentations at conferences. The building serves as a teaching tool, a physical reminder of what happens when materials are confused with systems, when profit outweighs precaution, when promises are sold without proof. The broader lesson extends beyond one building. The Winecoff fire demonstrated that progress is not automatic, that height is not safety, that calling something modern does not make it safe. Every advance creates new risks that require new solutions. The solution is never to stop building tall. It is to build responsibly, with systems that assume disaster and prevent it. Downtown Atlanta has changed completely since 1946. The skyline bristles with towers taller than the Winecoff ever was. Hotels, offices, and residential buildings rise 30, 40, 50 stories. Each has multiple stairwells, sprinkler systems, fire alarms, emergency lighting, and evacuation plans. Each is safer than the Winecoff was because the Winecoff burned and killed enough people that laws changed. The building on Peachtree Street stands as a monument to that exchange. 119 lives for reforms that prevented thousands of future deaths. The math is brutal and clear. We do not learn without cost. We do not change without disaster. We wait until enough people die that ignoring the problem becomes politically impossible, and then we act. This pattern repeats across industries and eras. Workplace safety laws follow factory fires. Aviation regulations follow crashes. Drug testing protocols follow poisonings. The sequence is always the same. Catastrophe, investigation, reform, gradual forgetting, new complacency, eventual repeat. We build protections on corpses and hope the foundation holds long enough that we forget what it is made of. The Ellis Hotel operates today because someone decided the building was worth saving. The structure was sound, the location was valuable. The investment could return profit if managed correctly, so the tower survives, renamed and renovated, housing guests who sleep unaware of what happened in these walls, or who know and choose to stay anyway. Choosing to stay is its own form of trust. It assumes the renovations were thorough. It assumes sprinklers will activate and alarms will sound and stairwells will remain passable. It assumes the systems will work because we have learned, because 119 deaths taught us. because we would not repeat such an obvious mistake. That assumption is mostly correct. Modern fire safety works. Deaths from hotel fires have declined to near zero in buildings that follow current codes. The reforms that followed the Winecoff have saved lives measurably and continuously for 7 decades. But the assumption also depends on maintenance, on inspection, on continued enforcement of regulations that cost money and require vigilance. It depends on not cutting corners, not deferring upgrades, not trusting that. Because nothing has burned recently, nothing will burn tomorrow. It depends on remembering that safety is not a destination, but a process, not a material, but a commitment. The building remembers, not literally, not consciously, but through the care forced upon it by its past. The Ellis Hotel is inspected more frequently than newer buildings. Its sprinkler system is tested rigorously. Its staff is trained in evacuation procedures with an intensity that reflects knowledge of what happens when systems fail. The Winecoff fire created a haunting that is legal, structural, and procedural rather than spectral. The ghosts are in the codebooks, in the sprinkler heads, in the fire doors that close automatically, and the exit signs that glow green in darkness. The building is haunted by safety measures implemented because once, in this exact location, safety was assumed and people died. On Peachtree Street, the tower stands 15 stories tall. The brick is clean. The windows are clear. The name above the entrance says Ellis Hotel. Inside, guests sleep in rooms where smoke once traveled faster than escape. They wake, check out, and leave reviews praising the location and the service and the quiet. Life continues in a building that killed 119 people because we accept this as the price of learning. We build tall because we must. We build safe because we learned. And somewhere between those two imperatives lies the question the Winecoff still asks. What will we accept when convenience outruns caution? What will we tolerate when progress moves faster than protection? Will we wait for the next disaster to teach the next lesson, or can we learn before the body count demands it? The building offers no answer. It simply stands, a monument to the gap between what we promise and what we deliver, between the word fireproof and the reality of flame, between the certainty sold in brochures and the impossible choices made in smoke-filled rooms at 3 in the morning when help cannot reach and windows open onto empty air. The Ellis Hotel is open for reservations. The past is available for occupancy. The question is whether we remember enough to stay vigilant or whether comfort has erased caution once again.